Hello, and welcome to Scott's Odyssey. It was December 31st, 1999, and everyone was out for a New Year's Eve celebration, or happily watching a ball drop take place while clutching their loved one closely and looking forward to a new year. Well, not everyone, not me. No, I was on hour 26 of one of the longest days of my life and working through the longest nail biting night I had ever experienced with a fellow coworker and a handful of contractors from Quebec who I wanted to do malevolent things to with a keyboard or a mouse cord. Never mind. It was 11:59 and we held our breath. Happy New Year. The lights stayed on and all the computers slowly buzzed and clicked themselves back to life. So, was Y2k just a hoax? See you in a minute. Welcome back. If you've watched my videos before, thank you for your patronage. And if you're new to Scott's Odyssey, well, welcome aboard. While perusing the Usenet news groups back in 1985, there was an interesting mention by Spencer Bowles who stated, I have a friend that raised an interesting question that I immediately tried to prove wrong. He's a programmer and has this notion that when we reach the year 2000, computers will not accept the new date. And thus was born something that became an ongoing debate full of conjecture for the next 13 years before the mainstream media and formerly accredited schools of academia started to listen to those of us who actually knew what we were talking about. Welcome to the Odyssey tale of the century date change error, and to those of us who knew it in the field, the fault date logic bug, or fatal, now known historically as the numeronym Y2k. As far back as 1985, computers were becoming much more commonplace in the business industry to perform data calculations and maintain basic finance and accounting within large banks. Most of the data was run on large mainframe systems, primarily using IBM OS VS1, VS2, MVS, or some sort of VAX instruction set running programs you interfaced from a dumb terminal. And there were a handful of IBM PCs running custom COBOL programs for financial record keeping. But 1985 was a really good year for computers. During that year, the standards for File Transfer Protocol, or FTP, were established. The first iteration of software arts products, known as Lotus, later to become the infamous Lotus 123 accounting software, was released. The Department of Defense performed its very first security evaluation for computers and released the 5200.28 standard, or as it was known to those in the DoD and those of us on the darker side of the new cyber world, the Orange Book. The beginning of the hacker world was taking a professional look at the evolution of computers, and Richard Stallman created the Free Software Foundation based on the second rule of the hacker's ethic that all information should be free. What? You don't know that the hackers had ethics? Well, as a matter of fact, the hackers have very specific ethics that are beneficial for a free society, and they are: one, to access all computers or anything which might teach you something about the way the world works should be unlimited and total. So a hacker would always yield to the hands-on imperative, meaning you should be permitted to learn the device and even break it down to its basic component parts to understand it in order to build upon that information and create new and even more interesting things. Number two, all information should be free, because a free, or more accurately, fully unrestricted access in the exchange of information allows for greater overall creativity and progress. Number three, mistrust authority and promote decentralization. This is based on the most accurate depiction that all bureaucracies, whether they be corporate, government, or university, are flawed systems with only their personal interest being served. Number four, hackers should be judged by their hacking and not bogus criteria such as a degree, their age, their race, their sex, or their position in a company. because from the other side of the screen, we can't see any of that criteria and only the skill, the talent, and creativity of the opposing person. Number five, you can create art and beauty on a computer, representing that which is found in any new and innovative creative outlet. The ability to watch someone deconstruct, decipher, or outsmart established rules within a computer is quite most impressive when it comes to magic tricks that one can actually see in the field. And lastly, number six, computers can change your life for the better. A concept at the time that promoted the world open up by the computer was limitless. And honestly, we have seen that idea come to fruition, being that the majority of the world, as we know it today, would cease to exist if the computers fell silent. In 1985, IBM also developed the NetBIOS Enhanced User Interface, or NetBEUI, which now allowed all disparate computers on disparate networks to communicate over a common protocol. Essentially, it was the birth of the truly connected world. And my favorite part of 1985 was probably the academic paper written by Mary Ann Buckles regarding video game aesthetics, specifically attaining her doctorate by establishing a process of interactive fiction in video games and the outcome of the emotional and cultural impact on humanity. Yay for video games. Yes, this woman predicted the universe where most people would live, staring at a screen and holding a controller, playing a computer game, and the positivity of common interest and making friends where they never knew who was on the other side, and they only knew they were happy and having fun and being creative with those other people. Now, you may be wondering why I've identified those previous points of things that occurred in regards to the computers of 1985. Well, what we are doing is identifying things that happened that formed the predicates of the hacker ethic, all working conjointly in producing a world of free and readily available information and intercommunication between individuals who cared more for their contribution of information than for who or what was on the other side of the computer. Which brings us back to Usenet. Usenet was, and well, still is, although nothing in the size and usage as it once was, a worldwide distributed discussion system that uses Unix to Unix copy protocol over dial-up connections. In more mundane terms, it's the first internet-based chat forum. To put it into perspective, it's a precursor to sites such as Reddit or 4chan, the latter of which I would recommend avoiding because of its dark web connections, and the former to avoid due to its toxicity from the cesspool of humanity. In one of the news groups, a term used to identify a specific channel within Usenet, usually identifying a formal address on how to find the group, such as alt.binaries to download full games and software 1.4 megs at a time, or in this case, net.puzzle, where Spencer Bowles asked his question. Spencer stated, "I have a friend that raised an interesting question that I immediately tried to prove wrong. He's a programmer and has this notion that when we reach the year 2000, computers will not accept the new day. Will computers assume that it's 1900, or will it even cause a problem? I violently oppose this because it seems so meaningless. Computers have entered into existence during the century and has software, specifically accounting software, been prepared for this turnover. If this really comes to pass and my friend is correct, what will happen? Is it anything to be concerned about? I haven't given it much thought, but this programmer has. I thought he was joking, but he has even lost sleep over the outcome of this." When I say friend, I'm not referring to myself if it seemed that way. Oddly enough, one of my first jobs when I was only 16 was to do a small COBOL programming gig to help correct some calculation errors. And it was to be done as a favor from a mentor who was an oblate in the Catholic school system in order for me to learn, or more accurately, was being corporally punished about being charitable with my skills. And that was the first time I personally had the notion of an issue with the date format being set in only 2 digits, wondering what would happen in the future, being that I would surely be alive long after those 2 digits needed to be recorded in 4. But like my predecessors, I figured there's no way anyone's going to be using this garbage software by that time. And heck, most of the people I'm coding this for will probably be moved on to other jobs, dead, or this company won't even exist. After Spencer posted his question, it took less than 4 minutes for the news group to explode into speculation on the potential dilemma. And after more than 10,000 posts, the news group finally went quiet and moved on to other curiosities. And that was 1985. It would be another decade before somebody actually took notice and was bothered enough by the discourse in a Usenet news group to actually say something about it in a serious manner. And after all, why would anyone care? Nobody at that time but a few of us nerds knew anything about computers. Even today, people like to believe they know about computers, but there's so much more about them that even I, a lifelong computer professional, have begun to lose track of all the new intricacies. It is a complicated and exponentially growing world. There should be a Moore's Law joke in here somewhere. Anyway, the media finally caught up and began a fire about the newly found year 2000 bug in computers that would surely bring about the end of civilization. And well, they were kind of close to hitting the nail on the head. You see, the essence of the problem, as described by the media, by the politicians, and by the academia, was that because dates are only recorded in 2 digits, the computers will roll over on January 1st, 2000 to read 1900. And well, that was pretty darn accurate. Then, when money came into the mix, the media posted the most insane variations of man becoming caveman and the moon falling out of alignment. And well, they had a lot of fun because it was also not just a century turnover, but a millennial turnover of date. So Mayan prophecy and planetary alignment and end of civilization and Christian prophecy of end times all fit so perfectly into this little package of a computing dilemma that we could call Y2k. The politicians actually did not speak much about Y2k.
This is not one of the summer movies where you can close your eyes during the scary parts.
And that was actually the scariest part of the whole ordeal. The academia came out saying the issue of the 2 dates was due to lazy programmers designing faulty clock chips that only recorded 2 bytes to maintain the year, which was partly true in how they did it. But space on a clock chip was minimal, and when you coded, there was no reason in the 70s or 80s when this was created to think people would be using the same code of a newly evolved device such as a computer in the 90s, let alone longer than that. As a matter of fact, the designers of the first clock chips were now all dead and buried. That brings us to what really was the Y2k bug. Well, everyone likes to tout an issue with recording dates in a 2-digit format to save space, and that was a problem in a lot of software that ran on top of a computer. But as I can tell you for a fact, the problem was a lot bigger than that. You see, computers recorded dates in a lot of different manners. Some used program logic that would calculate dates based on years of the 20th century. Many used logic surrounding calculations of seconds that have elapsed since a predefined date, specifically January 1st, 1970, 12 a.m., or January 1st, 1980, 12 a.m. And then there was the logic of leap year. The first response to Spencer back in 1985 actually called out the leap year problem of 2000 in computer dates. It was predicated on a computer date only having 2 digits and assuming it was the 1900s, which it was at the time. But both the operating system and the software running on top of the operating system had logic to deal with leap years that requires leap years to, well, right there, only be divisible by 4 except those divisible by 100 and those divisible by 400, where the year 2000 unfortunately met all the needs to be considered by a computer, not a leap year. So the main error in the computers would be that on January 1st, 2000, the date would read 1900. But some would also read 1980, some would read 1970, and in a very few situations, some would have a Crouch-Echelon effect, or more commonly known as the time dilation effect, which I got to experience firsthand during testing of compact systems. In the time dilation effect, the computer date would display some seriously nonsensical date like 42/21/24/567. And from what I understand, nobody to this day still knows why these dates popped up in such a fashion. What was the scope of what could happen with this date issue? Well, most people felt it would just be a minor nuisance and just have to be ignored for a while until a software fix came out to fix your operating system to ignore what the computer BIOS clock chip was telling the software. And in many cases, this was the actual fix. But there was a problem with computers that were integrated into infrastructure devices such as water, power, natural gas, as well as an even bigger problem with the banking systems and stock markets that ran the world's money. Something as simple as a bad date would plummet the entire planet into an issue of no power generation, no basic necessities like water or heat, no gasoline for your cars. The entire food chain would be disrupted, and all the money that was being kept track of through financial softwares would essentially be erased, or at best, miscalculated in positives and negatives. Yeah, it was really that bad. I know. Nobody ever believes that. It was that bad that by 1998, the US government had a series of contingency plans in preparation for the National Guard as well as regular military to be dispersed throughout cities in order to initiate martial law and maintain order. The calculations of failure dictated that it would take upward of 3 years to repair the damage to the electrical infrastructure alone, a number that remains to this day, where all the politicians still argue that it is an issue, but nothing has been done to remedy the problem in more than 22 years. Preparations for the deaths of millions of people and the establishment of mass graves were initiated. Conspiracy, right? Well, conspiracy is not what is outlined in President Clinton's Y2k executive order from February 4th, 1998, nor from Britain's Y2k National Contingency Plan by the Action 2000 Council in May of 1998, nor the mission critical reports of the Air Force from 1995 that were still not complete because of the number of issues by 1998. These papers are all available, albeit redacted, on multiple government websites, including the Library of Congress, and if you use the Wayback Machine, there's a site dedicated to snapshots of the internet. Feel free to look at one of those original leakers of government information. His name was Gary North, and make sure you look it up on the correct years. The current site is a weird amalgamation of financial investments and religion, but GaryNorth.com was where you needed to go to find leaks. And I hear you, some nut job posting stuff on the web, but hear me out. This was in 1998. Most of you did not have a computer. If you had internet, it was done over a telephone line as dial-up, unless you were lucky enough and wealthy enough to be in a big city where you could possibly get DSL. You most likely used some horrible service such as AOL or NetZero. The web was not a place to be putting up crazy conspiracy websites on a whim. You actually had to have money to put up a website, and it was quite pricey. But it was a new, uncontrolled medium where people could communicate freely without government or modern social justice interventions. I've seen many people who claim to have been Y2K compliance officers or workers, and they say the situation was not bad. But I assure you, when you work for the aerospace industry and you do government contracts, you were able to get your eyes on their plans, and what they wanted to do was just frightening. So much so that many of the people who worked in the IT industry and on government or large infrastructure side jobs all became what are commonly called preppers. And along with their work, their view of the world in our country changed forever. In the end, through 3 years of hard work, days of poring over manufacturers' compliance checks on their software and hardware, months of patches, months of individual testing of equipment, and more money than you ever thought you could make working at an IT help desk, we did it. We beat the Y2K bug and stopped it in its tracks. We actually saved the world. Just to have politicians and media say it was all a hoax, and the academia record the incident as mass hysteria of an era now gone, which cost us our jobs, our livelihood, and brought about the biggest dip the IT world had ever seen because we were right all along, and they didn't like that. Some of us moved on to other industries and other small jobs in our field, but most of us became close friends and lived on to view and see all the things the government and media do to people to this day. So when you hear about large numbers of coffins being transported around, or government guillotines being built, or rules for martial law or mass raids on small areas, and that the power grid might go down due to insert what they now call conspiracy theory, remember that Y2k proved it to be a reality that fortunately never came to pass that time. But interestingly enough, it looks like someone kept the playbooks, and small snippets of that playbook keep getting used every time the powers that be want to keep us in check. But I guess we'll see in Y2k27 or Y2k38. What? You don't know about the COBOL programming bug where the date calculation ends on December 31st, 2027? Or the even bigger one, the 2038 bug known as Epoch Ellipse Friday the 13th bug. We'll save that for another episode. I hope you enjoyed the first installment of the ODDySEEy Woo Files. Remember to like and to subscribe. It really makes a difference. And be sure to leave a comment below of what you remember of Y2k and how you or your company may have handled the issue. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next episode.